Hi everyone, Jane here. Thank you for watching my video today. Today I'm going to be completing a page in my handmade journal because I want to do some embossing and it's easier to use pages that I can take out of the actual journal. So I'm starting off on my page using some Distress Oxide inks. Now these are inks I own, but I don't always use them that much. For some reason, I don't know why, I just tend to go back to the original Distress inks more. So I'm using Antique Linen and Rusty Hinge. And I have these domed blending foams for these ones because I just find them easier to use. And I keep these ones specifically for the Distress Oxides so I don't muddle them up. So I've decided I wanted to sort of have two main areas. Now I'm intending to do some spotlights on here, which you will see in a moment. So I'm trying to put down some interest in the background to start with. So adding a bit of colour, and now I'm going to add some stamping. And I'm going to use Archival inks because they won't move when I then add anything else over the top. I'm using this Ephemera set from Chocolate Baroque. Now, all these stamp sets I have had in my stash for quite some time, so I'm not sure if they are still available. If they are, I will possibly provide links in the description box below. I will certainly list everything in the description box, and I'm sure that there are alternatives to these available if these are no longer sort of things that are on the market. So I used the Ephemera from the Chocolate Baroque set, and then I am using let me just have a look. I'm using a stamp set that doesn't have a name, so I think it's sort of like just stitches and things, and this is from Be Crafty, and it's got a tape measure and it's got different stitches on. It's a really handy little stamp set. And then finally I'm using the numbers, these big numbers, which I do love. I think they just add something really lovely to the background. Now I started off with the Wild Honey, and then I moved on to Vintage Photo, and finally I'm using Ground Espresso. So I'm sort of getting the darker colours towards the end. Although having said that, the Wild Honey was quite strong. Maybe my Ground Espresso is probably one of my most used, so it's actually not as strong because it's sort of probably needs re-inking. Now I did make sure that I had dried this off with my heat tool, and I'm also now adding some anti-static because I only want the powder to cling where I've put the embossing ink. So I'm using a stencil with just circles. I think it was one I actually die cut with my own circle dies, and I'm using the Versamark Ink Pad, but any clear sticky embossing ink will do. And I'm then adding clear powder from Ranger over the top to create a resist for after I've finished this section. So the idea is that I want to have highlighted areas on my page. So that's why I've already covered in some of the background, because I want some of these pieces to remain visible really clearly and others to be less visible. So once I'd added all my powder, I'm going to heat it with my heat tool. And the thing, if you're going to do any kind of resist embossing, is you do want to make sure that you don't overheat your embossing powder. Now it can be a little bit tricky to see when you're doing something like clear, but you can see it change from like a dull to a shiny. And as soon as that change has happened, you need to move your heat tool on. You don't want to keep on heating in one area. It will make it sink into the card and not be resistant. So once that had cooled, which doesn't take long, just probably a few seconds really, I'm now going in with the Vintage Photo Distress ink. This is not an oxide, this is the normal ink, and I'm going in with a flat foam this time, and I'm really emphasizing adding the ink around where those circles are because I want them to pop against the background. Now you will still see the background because the distress ink is translucent, so it's not going to totally cover that background up, which is what I wanted, but I did want those embossed areas to sort of pop out a little bit more. And then I'm just adding a little bit of water just to bring out that distress sort of look that you get with distress inks. I'm using images from the Little Personas book by Maremi Small Arts. This is the original sort of industrial book that she brought out. And I've chosen this image because it's got those same tones in the image that are in the background. Plus that little touch of blue in those bottles I thought was a nice contrast against that yellowy browny sort of rusty tone. So I'm cutting her out to start with. I don't cut every single little flourish of hair or lace of her boot out. I am cutting out the main image because I don't think anybody's going to know. Well, nobody will know unless they've got the book and they study it. So I am cutting it directly out right to the edge of the image because I want it to be flat against my page. So I'm starting out, I'm cutting her away from that background. She was in a background of all these little bottles and I wanted to use the bottles, but I didn't want to use them all as the one image. I often do this where I sort of cut the image into different parts so that I can use it as I want it. So I cut her out and then I'm cutting out different sections of the bottles. Sometimes you have to sort of chop bits off to make it make sense, but you know, it's really easy. The paper is lovely and thin and it's quite simple to be able to do that. Now, because I had used distress oxides and distress inks in the background, I knew that I had to be a little bit more careful when I was applying my collage. Usually I'm quite slapdash and I fling my collage medium everywhere. So because I knew that the inks really do reactivate quite easily, I just took my images to the side and just added my matte medium, which is the Liquitex Professional, sort of just very carefully across the back, and then stuck it down and then just added a little bit of the medium, mostly on the actual image, trying not to move my brush too much around on the ink, and that meant that the ink stayed in place. Then I wanted to add a sentiment. These are the label type stickers from Tim Holtz, and I've just chose Full of Wonder because I thought it went with the sort of the imagery on the page. And I did add a little bit. I didn't stick glue on the back of this one because it felt actually very sticky, this label. So I just added a little bit of the medium over the top and then gave it a little dry. I dried on a low heat and I did it very much trying to not stop in one place because I didn't want to reheat that embossing powder. And I wanted it to look like there was a little bit of grounding underneath her feet. So I am going over the top of where the embossing is. I don't know if the Stabilo or pencil will stay on top of there, but it was fine for that moment. And if it moves off of that bit and just goes onto the actual card bit, it doesn't really matter. It's going in my journal. So it's, you know, it's really just for me mostly to see from now on. So that was the end of my project. Thank you ever so much for watching today. If you have enjoyed this video, do please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed, that would be lovely if you could do that too. And until the next time, bye-bye.